Welcome to the Prisoner Officer Podcast. In this episode, I'm going to introduce myself and introduce this new podcast. My name is Mike Cantrell, and this podcast is a place to have a conversation about the forgotten cops in this country's jails, prisons, and correctional centers. A place for me to try to make some sense of a career spent working inside the fence with some of the greatest people that nobody sees or recognizes for the important job they do. These people are prison officers, correctional officers. With that said, let me tell you how I started in corrections. 30 years ago, I walked into Missouri State Penitentiary. I was just 22 years old and I'd never even seen the inside of a jail. My last 2 years were spent on a small island off Hawaii in the middle of the Pacific Ocean working as a government cook on an Air Force base. Home on leave, I saw an ad for a cook at Missouri State Pen, and without a thought I applied and forgot about it. Then one day, weeks later, the phone rang. "Mr. Cantrell?" I said, "Yes." "This is Laura with the Missouri Department of Corrections. We have received your application and wondered if you would be interested in a CO position." Well, ma'am, I've worked all kinds of positions as a cook. What type of cook is a CO?" "Mr. Cantrell, we don't need cooks right now. What we do need is correctional officers. Would you be interested in applying for a correctional officer position? You might be able to move into a cook job later on." "Okay, that sounds good. I've never done any officer work, but I can try." I asked, "What does a correctional officer do?" "Well, mostly they watch inmates and they see that they're following the rules," she said. I've never forgotten that last line. It was the understatement of the century. But then again, Laura, she probably didn't know what a correctional officer does. Most people don't. Looking back now, I can tell you what a correctional officer does. A correctional officer endures hours of sitting alone, fighting sleep in a cold tower built at the turn of the century in some old prison. A correctional officer tramps through the woods at all hours of the night with a shotgun and a flashlight, hoping the inmate that escaped doesn't have either one. A correctional officer cleans up blood, piss, and feces from a seg unit. A correctional officer will give an inmate news that someone in their family died, and then restrain that same inmate when they lose control, lose their emotions. A correctional officer will watch for hours at a time waiting for an inmate sitting on a bucket to see when he passes the balloon of tobacco, heroin, marijuana, etc., whatever it was that he swallowed 2 days ago. A correctional officer holds the hand of an inmate as he dies, because he's scared and he cries out, and there's no one else there. A correctional officer is verbally and physically assaulted every day. These are the things a correctional officer does. I didn't know any of this when I started, and I doubt many of you did either when you started. I went into corrections because my father was a firefighter. I know that doesn't make sense now, but to me at the time I was following in his public service footsteps. I would be there as a public servant, one of the good guys, maybe even a hero. A few weeks into my state-issued uniform, it showed me that correctional officers are not considered public servants the way some other professions are. Consider the way society looks at each of the following. Firefighters. No matter what they do, and I love them, my dad was a firefighter, they're a hero. If the entire building burns all the way down, they just keep the fire from spreading, they're a hero. Police officers, they're a hero half the time, depending on what side of the argument you're on. If you are a bad guy, he's a dick. If you're a good guy, he's a hero. Correctional officers, well, we're always wrong. No matter what good a correctional officer does, they're perceived by the inmates as wrong. The inmates' family perceive them as wrong. The news media routinely shows us as wrong. The only people who truly think of us as being right are the good people in the public. But they're the same ones who want to forget that we exist behind those walls. To recognize the job we do, they have to deal with the fact that they are partially responsible for keeping a human being locked away. Don't forget, correctional officers are not the ones who put these inmates in jail. As a matter of fact, we had the least to do with their incarceration. The public supported and put in place the laws. The police officers arrested them. The judges sentenced them. We just keep them behind the fence that society built. Despite the public's fascination with crime and crime shows, most people don't want to admit the existence of the boogeyman. The general public does not want to deal with the fact that the devil walks among us. To do so would also be admitting what humans are capable of, and they don't want to admit that. I never became a cook. I was a good correctional officer, and I never looked back. And in these next few episodes, I'll introduce the Prison Officer Podcast to you, and I hope that we can both learn a little about each other. I will not only be talking about my experiences, but I want to talk about some really important issues in our profession. Why are so many of our staff killing themselves? How can we be better spouses and parents when we get outside the fence when our shift's over? I want to talk about correctional leadership, how you can grow in this profession and make a difference. I want to talk about staff manipulation, something that's probably affected every one of you. How do we stop it from occurring? How do we stop from losing good staff to manipulation? I want to talk about the changing generations in corrections. The baby boomers, the millennials, the Gen Xers. How do we all work together to keep each other safe? Well, that's it for today's episode. If you haven't already, check out the Prisoner Officer Podcast on Facebook and click that little follow button or leave us a message. And if you are listening to us on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, click the subscribe button. Till next time, I'm Mike Cantrell. Watch your back, and please take care of each other out there behind those walls and fences.